All right, so 17A is all about the midpoint formula. You've probably seen this before in algebra, and we've talked a little bit about midpoints in here already as well. What is a midpoint? It's a point in the middle, right? Midpoint. It's a point in the middle of a segment. So if we're thinking on a number line, if I have point A here and point B here, this has a value of A, this has a value of B. We're looking for the middle, the midpoint, in other words. So those are congruent segments. Anyone know how you would find the middle of that? There's a concept from algebra that gets you there. Yeah.
Is it like AB over, I can't.
You're close. You're very close. Do you know how to find an average? How do you find an average? Add them up, divide by how many there are, okay? This is essentially finding the average of 2 points. So you're going to take your A value and your B value, add them together, and divide by 2, okay? So that's how you would do it on a number line. A plus B, cut it in half. In the coordinate plane, which is what you're going to do more, it's this. And I'm going to write this out as the formula. This is the midpoint formula, just so you have reference to it if you would like to use it later using this terminology. So if A, which we're going to call x1, y1, and B, which we're going to call x2, that's a 2, sorry, my 2 won't write, and y2, oh my goodness, come on. There we go. So if A is x1, y1, and B is x2, y2, the midpoint is going to be just like what we did on the number line, but now you have an x and a y instead of just one value. You have 2 values that you're working with. So we would say the midpoint of segment AB is M, which will be x1 plus x2 divided by 2, and then y1 plus y2 divided by 2. So now you're taking both of your x terms, adding them together, dividing by 2, and both of your y terms, adding them together and dividing by 2. Okay, and I'm just going to show you that real quick on a coordinate plane just so you kind of get a visual, oops, that's not what I wanted, of what's going on here. So let's say I have, for instance, the point -2, 0, and then I have the point 2, 6. Okay, so this is -2, 0. This is 2, 6. Okay, you don't even need to necessarily take notes on this. I just want you to see what we're talking about so that it's making sense to you. So if this is my segment, just going to draw the line in so we can see it a little better. What they're saying is if this is x1, y1, and this is x2 and y2, we're going to add our x values together. So -2 plus 2 divided by 2, and we're going to add our y values together. So 0 plus 6 divided by 2. So where you should end up, your midpoint, -2 plus 2 is 0 divided by 2, which is 0, and then 0 plus 6 divided by 2 would be 3. Well, if you look at this picture, 0, 3 is a point. That means these two pieces are congruent. Okay, so you found the midpoint by plugging into this midpoint formula. Okay, so that's what you're going to be doing on the coordinate plane. You don't have to graph them. I just wanted you to see, like, here's what you're finding. It's that middle point on the segment. Okay, so here's what you're going to be doing with it. for this first example, they'll say find the midpoint. And they might say on a number line, or they might say in the coordinate plane, or they might just give you something like this. AB has endpoints at -4 and 9. Okay, so if they just give you two numbers, they're saying on a number line, essentially, what's the midpoint of that? Okay, now you don't have to plot it on a number line. If it helps you to see it better on a number line, go for it, or maybe that's how you want to check your answer, but you really don't have to do a number line. What are you going to do with those two numbers? How do you find the midpoint when you're just given two numbers? Add them up, divide by 2, right? There's two numbers there. So basically you're finding the average. -4 plus 9 divided by 2. So you get 5/2, or if you want to call that 2.5, that would be the midpoint of segment AB, would fall at 2.5. If you want to graph it and see, does it actually fall there? Go for it. It's a good way to check your answer, but you definitely do not need to graph it, okay? Okay, so that's if they give it to you just, here's two values, find the midpoint. Other times they're going to say EF has endpoints squeeze that in, of 7, 5. And F at 2, -4. Okay, and same thing, find the midpoint of that. Where I see the most mistakes made on these problems when there's coordinates like this is a lot of times people just forget what is X, what is Y, what's X1, what's X2, that type of thing. So make sure that if this is your X1, what is this 5? It's Y1. A lot of times I see people write X1 and then X2, right? Think about it's an X value. It's got to be that first point in the coordinate. So that would be Y1. This would be X2. This would be Y2. Here's a question for you. Does 7 have to be X1? Could 7 be X2? It can, okay? So you're able to pick whichever point is going to be your set of 1s or your set of 2s. That doesn't matter, okay? Remember the commutative property? Go back to Algebra 1 a little bit. You can do it in any order, and you're still going to get the same thing, okay? So we're going to set this up, X1 plus X2, so 7 plus 2 divided by 2. And then Y1, which is 5, plus Y2, which is a -4, divided by 2. You're welcome right there just to write that as 5 minus 4. If you want to think through the algebra that way, that's totally fine. And then you just always want to make it as simple as possible. So don't leave it like this because that doesn't tell us a whole lot. Simplify that, 9/2 and 1/2. So 9/2, 1/2 could be your midpoint. Or if you want to simplify that further, you could call this 4.5 and 0.5. Either one of those is a perfectly acceptable answer, okay? However you prefer to see it, fractions or decimals. Questions on that? Okay, that's supposed to be the easy part. Where it gets a little bit fancier is now they're going to give you a midpoint, and you have to find one of the endpoints. So they'll give you one endpoint, they'll give you the midpoint, and you have to figure out what's that other endpoint going to be then. Okay, and I have a couple ways that I can show you this. You choose which one makes more sense to you and run with that one. All right, so this is example 2. Instead of finding a midpoint now, we're going to find an endpoint. Okay, so this is how they'll say it. This says the midpoint of CD is M, which is the point -2, 1. Okay, one endpoint is C, which is negative 5, 7. Find the other endpoint. D. Okay. You have the option here, if you would like to see it visually, of graphing it. It doesn't always make it simpler for people. For some, it's like, yeah, I can totally see it if I graph it. You're welcome to graph it. I don't think it's the quickest or the easiest option, but you're welcome to do it if that's who you are as a learner, okay? I'm going to show you 2 other ways other than graphing it that will help you find your answer. So the way the book does it, you're using the midpoint formula and just plugging numbers into the right places. So if you want to do it the book route, like if you're one that likes to refer back to the way the book did it and look in the book like, oh, here's what they were trying to show me here, this is your way, okay? They give you, first of all, we know the midpoint formula, right? X1 plus X2 divided by 2 and Y1 plus Y2 divided by 2. So if we're going to use that formula, think about what we have. We have our X value of our midpoint, so we're going to call that X sub M. We have our Y value of our midpoint, so I'm going to call that YM. And then we have one endpoint. So we have our X1, Y1. We don't have our X2, Y2, okay? So we're going to call this X1, Y1 for now. But now what you have to do is you have to break it into parts. You have to solve for your X, and then you have to solve for your Y, and then you can name what your point is. So we're going to break this up and just do the X portion for now, okay? If I'm going to do the X portion, so I'm going to do this with my X values. What's going to go here in the M spot? It's the -2, right? That's my X value of my midpoint. So I'm going to do -2 equals, my X1 value is -5. My X2 value is what we don't know yet. So we're going to have to solve for that. And then it's divided by 2. Okay, so we're just going to stop there. That's my X's. Then we're going to set it up for our Y's. So to set it up for our Y's, what is my, so now this one's a little bit weird because your M is here and you're setting it up with this piece now. So what's my Y midpoint value? That's the 1, that's up here. And that's going to equal my Y1, which is what? That's your 7, right? Plus my Y2 divided by 2. So basically we took the midpoint formula and we cut it in half. We did the X's and we did the Y's, okay? From here, it's algebra. How do you solve this? So what's your first step? If you're looking at this portion of it, what do you do first? Times 2. You're going to multiply by 2 on both sides. So you get -4 equals, this is 1, so -5 plus X2, and then you're just going to add your 5. So 1 is going to be your X2 value. Okay? Then you simplify on the other side. Multiply by 2 on both sides, and you get 2 equals 7 plus Y2, because this would simplify to 1. Take away your 7, and you get your Y2 value is -5. Okay? The question was, what's the other endpoint? So you write it as a point. You're going to say my endpoint is 1, -5. Okay, so that is your final answer. So you're taking the midpoint formula, you're setting up your X's, you're setting up your Y's, and solving for both. Okay, that's the way the book shows you to do it. I have a different way that I feel like might be easier for you, might not be easier for you. It's totally up to you. But I'll show you just so you have access to it if you would rather do it this way. Okay, here's how you could do it. Let's say my midpoint is 4, -9. My endpoint, A, is -3, -5. And we want to find our other endpoint, B. So technically right now this is our X2 and our Y2. We just don't know what it is, okay? if you think about it in terms of x's and y's, but on a number line, okay? So if I think of this on a number line, I have two endpoints. Okay, so this is going to be for my x's. This is going to be for my y's. Two endpoints and a midpoint. They told me for my x's, my midpoint is 4. Okay, so that's 4. My other endpoint is a -3. Where would the -3 go on the number line? To the left or the right of that 4? To the left. So if this is a -3, we're trying to figure out what that is. Well, to get from -3 to 4, how many units is that? 7. So if I go 7 more units, where do I end up? 11. Okay, that's going to be my value for x. The reason this one can get a little hairy is a lot of times people go, oh, it's 7, and then they stop, and they give me 7 as their x value. You need to make sure you add 7 if you do it that way, okay? So then if we look at our y's, my y midpoint is -9. So the middle one is -9. My other value here is a -5. Where is that in comparison to my -9? To the left or to the right? It's to the right, okay? So the -5 is going to go here, which means I'm going this way, and I need to keep going that way to find my other endpoint. So how far is it from -5 to -9? We subtracted 4 units, right? So then -9, if we subtract 4 units, where do I end up? -13. So that's going to be your y value. So your point is 11, -13. Okay? You may use whichever of those methods you like better. You're doing the same thing, essentially. It's just the order in which you're doing it or the manner in which you're doing it to get you to that point. Okay? Do you want to see one or the other a second time? Which one? Which one do you like better? The second one? Okay, let's do one more like that. Let's say you have a midpoint of 6, 8, and an endpoint of -2, 9. And I want to know what's your other endpoint. So we'll say, what is point F right now? We're trying to find our other endpoint F. So if you set it up the number line way, your midpoint for your, so call this your x's and this one for your y's. What is your midpoint for your x's? That would be 6. What's your other endpoint for your x's? -2, right? So that's going to be to the left of our 6. How many units between -2 and 6? 8. So we need to go 8 more units. So we end up at 14. Okay? So that's going to be our x value. Our y value, our midpoint is at 8. One of our endpoints is at 9. Is that going to be to the left or to the right? You're going to put that to the right. So where do I go to the left? You're going 1 to the left, so go 1 more to the left. We end up at 7. So your point would be 14, 7. Okay? Anyone want to see the other one? We're okay? All right.